I'll start by saying we're obviously in a pivotal moment in world history. We are facing a global health pandemic that's changed the way we do business and the way we interact with each other, not just in our law firms, but in our homes and in our personal lives as well. And that global pandemic has disproportionately impacted communities of color around the world. We've also seen worldwide protests against racial injustice, global cries from people of goodwill of all races, declaring that Black lives do matter in the wake of the tragic murder of George Floyd. Our worlds are literally spinning. And for too long, we've been spinning our wheels when it comes to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion within our profession. We've been working at this issue in earnest for at least the last couple of decades. And for all of our efforts, we're not really seeing the progress and sustained results that we would expect. Why is that? I actually have a theory, and it's that for far too long, we've really been focused on recruitment and in more recent years, pipeline development with less of a focus on retention. What does it take to actually build an inclusive culture within the firm so that we can retain the talent that we've worked so hard to recruit and find in the first place? And so we have this conversation today about what it takes to actually break down barriers and to build inclusive and equitable cultures. I'm going to show you a short Procter and Gamble video entitled The Look. I'd ask you to take out a pen and a piece of paper and to jot down your reactions to this video.
All rise.
Yes, this is a day in the life of the judge in the video, and attorneys and other professionals of color in your firms aren't exempt from the experiences depicted in this video. Real lawyers from real law firms, not just an actor in a video, have reported the following as their real life, lived experiences, statements made to them by partners inside their law firms. Are statements like these happening in your firm? Would you know if lawyers whose identities are different than yours, marginalized groups, historically excluded or underrepresented groups, people of color, women, LGBTQ plus, differently abled colleagues are having similar experiences in your firms? If so, how would you know? What systems do you have in place to ascertain and understand what the experiences of all of your talent are within your firm? That's why we're here tonight. In our time together today, as we explore these topics, think about how these issues manifest in your country and region of the world. What are the power issues in your firm that might be negatively impacting your ability to successfully recruit, engage, develop, retain, and promote a diverse workforce? Think about the unique barriers that exist for your firm and which strategies would be most helpful to your firm in building a more inclusive and equitable culture. As you do so, know that you are not alone. We are all on this journey together. We're evolving together to build a stronger, fairer, more just, more equitable profession and world, one that makes the most of all the talent within our firms, so that as the world becomes increasingly more diverse and interconnected, so too do our firms at every level, from summer associate to professional staff to baby lawyers to equity partners, every level. And not just that we have a diverse mix of people in the firm, but so that we have an inclusive culture where everyone can thrive and the firm can serve its clients even more holistically. That's the goal, right? That's why you're here. So I'm going to assume this audience doesn't need convincing of the business case for diversity. God, I'm so over that. Like, if we are on business case, we're so far behind the times, right? I'm also going to assume that you know the data, that you've shown up for a session like this because the data bears out that we're not where we need to be in the profession in terms of diversity and inclusion. So instead, what I'd like to do is actually jump right into the barriers that have us where we are today. That's what we'll explore in part one. In part two, we'll turn to some strategies to break down those barriers and to advance equity and inclusion. And in part three, we'll have some time for reflection, for small group discussion and Q&A and dialogue. But first, I'd like for you to keep that pen and paper out that I asked you to take out a moment ago. And I'd like for you to write down the answers to two questions. What is one bright spot? What's something that your firm is doing well to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion? Maybe there's a particular area of D&I where you have seen success. Maybe it's in the advancing gender parity. Maybe it's with people of color, or maybe it's with the LGBTQ population and our colleagues there. What's one bright spot? And then I'd also like for you to think of one barrier, something that you know is an opportunity area for your firm in this area of DE&I. So there are five barriers that I'd actually like to spend some time discussing this evening. Barrier one, we haven't been strategic about advancing DE&I throughout our firms and throughout the profession. It's almost like we say of plaintiff's lawyers, at least we say it here in the States. It's like they just throw a whole bunch of stuff against the wall and see what sticks and hope for the best. Well, hope is not a strategy. And just as we do with every other business imperative, diversity, equity, and inclusion has to be that imperative as well, something that we weave throughout all of the objectives of our firm. For too long, we've seen a siloed approach where DE&I was not, again, the strategic imperative, but just something that we did. We plastered it on our website, we put it in some brochures, but really didn't devote any time, attention, and resources to it. We've also seen a lack of a differentiated approach. What I mean here is that too often we've assumed that whatever works for the majority culture in our firms is what will work for everyone else. This fails to take account of the needs of different underrepresented groups, and that what works to advance one particular underrepresented group isn't necessarily the same thing that another underrepresented group might need. We've assumed that a one-size-fits-all approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion will work, but it hasn't. Just look at the data. We've also done a lot of trainings. I'm in the trainings business, you guys. I'm not trying to talk myself out of work, but trainings alone will not do the trick. For too many firms, the idea of advancing diversity was just a let's have a series of trainings. In many instances, the trainings haven't been part of a broader strategic diversity, equity, and inclusion strategic plan. And I'll also note that for too long in the profession, many law firms have traditionally limited the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion to just the lawyers without looking at the professional side of the firm and the staff who support the attorneys. And what it means to really build an inclusive culture is that you take a holistic approach to ensuring that you're advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the entire firm. That's been missing from the conversation. That's been a significant barrier. Implicit biases. Now, this is not an implicit bias workshop, and we don't have time to go nearly into as much detail as I would like on the topic, but this issue is so pervasive and so pernicious that I am going to spend some time on it here. First, I want to unpack what we mean when we say implicit bias. It's the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. For this reason, it's often referred to as unconscious bias. Now, I'll tell you, I actually prefer the term implicit bias as opposed to unconscious bias for this reason. When people hear the term unconscious bias, I think it can lull us into a sense of, well, it's happening in my subconscious, so there's nothing I can do about it. When in fact, there are things that we can do about it. There are strategies that we can implement, we can raise our awareness, and we can work to de-bias our judgments and our decision making so that we get to the very best decisions and outcomes as possible. And those decisions and outcomes are as bias-free as possible. So let's take a look.
The unconscious mind is amazing. It can process vastly more information than our conscious mind by using shortcuts based on our background, cultural environment, and personal experiences to make almost instantaneous decisions about everything around us. The snag is, it's wrong quite a lot of the time, especially on matters that need rational thinking. Here's a classic example. A bat and a ball cost £1 10p. If the bat costs £1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Most people, including over 50% of students at some of the world's leading universities, get the answer wrong and say 10p. The answer is actually 5p. Many of us choose 10p without thinking. This is because our unconscious mind uses instinct, not analysis. So our unconscious is fallible. It's also biased. It makes snap judgments of people we meet, categorizing them according to gender, social and other characteristics. In milliseconds, we judge whether somebody is like us and belongs to our in-group. These are the people we favor. So men might favor men, while women might favor women. However, we can belong to different in-groups, and we like to be part of an in-group that's powerful, which could mean a woman favoring a man over a woman. That's unconscious bias. All of us have it, and it colors our decisions without our realizing. For example, research reveals that if I were a man, you would be more likely to be nodding in agreement right now because people pay more attention to a male voice. The Royal Society fosters excellence in science, but this can only be achieved if we select from the widest range of talent. And that's not possible if unconscious bias is narrowing down the field for non-scientific reasons. To lessen the impact of unconscious bias, which is easier for us to notice in others, we are raising the awareness of unconscious bias to members of our selection and appointment panels. We're encouraging panel members to deliberately slow down decision-making, reconsider reasons for decisions, question cultural stereotypes, and monitor each other for unconscious bias. We can't cure unconscious bias, but with self-awareness, we can address it.
So there are many biases, but there are four really common ones that are pervasive in law firm environments. And I want to talk about them briefly in our conversation, our time together this evening. The first one, affinity bias, or also known as in-group, out-group bias. This is the tendency to prefer someone like oneself or to view them in a more favorable light versus those who are in the out-group. Then there's confirmation bias, seeking or interpreting information that is partial to existing beliefs that we already have about a particular group of people. Then there's the halo effect, a tendency to believe only good about someone because they are liked, or allowing the person's positive traits in one area to influence overall perception. One example would be, I like Brit. She is nice. Therefore, she is also smart. Well, Brit may be nice and smart, but one doesn't necessarily flow from the other. Of course, she is nice and smart, right? But there is a tendency for us to put a halo there and say everything that Brit does is wonderful because she's an angel. The flip side of that is the horns effect. That's when a negative aspect colors your overall impression and leaves you with an inability to see or acknowledge the good or successes that someone has because of a negative experience or perception that you have of that person. These biases show up in everything from where we recruit, going to the same schools, going to the schools that I went to or my colleague down the hall went to in pre-COVID and after COVID times, right? To how we screen resumes and how we interview and hire candidates, preferring candidates who remind us of ourselves. Oh my God, I interviewed the most amazing young lawyer who was looking to get a job at our firm. And God, she reminded me so much of myself when I was younger. She must be amazing. I think I'm going to hire her. No one says that, but it happens all the time. It also happens in the plum assignments and development opportunities. Who gets tapped on the shoulder for the great work, the stretch assignments? Who is seen as having the potential to stretch beyond their current capacity and the potential for leadership? It also affects how we evaluate and promote candidates, who we presume to be competent, who has leadership potential. Even in our day-to-day interactions, the informal networks where information, tips, and strategies are shared. The third barrier is the inequitable distribution of work and opportunity assignment. Now, I know law firms typically have a laissez-faire approach to work where partners get to dole out all the work to who they want to work with, right? But because of how bias works, that typically means that people who are not like the partner doling out the work aren't likely to get a lot of the work, right? The tendency is to give it to people who look like us, who remind us of ourselves. That happens in terms of who gets to go on the pitch to client interviews to make the sell to the client about why the law firm should be chosen. It happens in terms of who actually is placed on the work assignment when the work comes in the door. Bias creeps into all of those processes so that you are often taking out a diverse team to get the work. But then when the work comes in, some of those attorneys who were brought out and shown as look at how diverse and representative we are don't get the quality work, don't get the meaningful depositions and trial experience. I'm a former litigator, so that's my world, but get stuck in document review. And ultimately, it affects who gets promoted and developed on the staff side as well, not just on the attorney side, but ultimately resulting in who gets promoted through the firm, who gets put up for and makes partner. The fourth barrier I want to touch on is the absence of clearly defined, articulated objective criteria for advancement. Now, the studies and the research tells us that this is a very real concern. Consider this conclusion. from a study that the Minority Corporate Counsel Association conducted and summarized in its report entitled The Myth of Meritocracy. The process of being nominated and elected to partner is not objective, nor is there a set of policies adhered to strictly in any firm. The skill sets, qualifications, or goals that a senior associate must possess in order to be elected to partnership are rarely specified in writing, nor are they clearly communicated to associates. The evaluation of each senior associate for partnership actually occurs prior to being nominated. Now, though this report is almost 2 decades old, it has aged well and unfortunately still proves true all these years later. Attorneys, people of color, people in marginalized groups often report uncertainty about what it takes to get promoted to the next level, what it takes to make partner, what it takes to make equity partner. Now, to be sure, associates who are part of the majority culture in your firm may understandably share this concern, but it's not combined with these other biases and the other barriers specific to attorneys from underrepresented groups, which means that this barrier has a disparate impact on already significantly underrepresented groups. The fifth barrier, inequitable access to sponsors. Attorneys from underrepresented groups frequently raise this as a significant barrier to advancement. The lack of access to senior leadership who will champion them and open doors, not just formal sponsors either, but also informal sponsors who take people under their wing, who vouch for them, who say, think about Wendy. She would be great for this stretch assignment. She would be great for this project. This is who we consider when we think about in terms of who is partner material, how books of business get passed down in law firms, right? Study after study cites this as also a persistent barrier. In the American Bar Association's most recent study on women of color in the profession from June 2020, entitled Left Out and Left Behind, for example, participants in the study cited the lack of access to mentors or sponsors who are well connected and have power and influence to both clue them into important dynamics of the workplace and to effectively advocate for them. So, what can we do in the face of all these barriers? Are there strategies that we can employ within our law firms to break down these barriers? Absolutely. What I'd say first, though, is that this work doesn't have to take decades. If we're serious about this, your firms can actually begin to see progress immediately and significant progress even within 4 to 5 years. I'd like to highlight a company we all know, Coca-Cola, as one example. Using objective metrics and data, it was able to create transparency and consistency in its diversity work, and within a 5-year period, showed a 68% increase in women and a 161% increase in representation by people of color within the officer ranks of the company. Now, in fairness, this did occur as the result of a settlement and a task force that monitored the company's compliance, but still, the company saw significant progress in just that short amount of window or time. It shows what's possible when we are intentional, right? And when we say what our goals are and we actively work toward them. This success is actually set forth in a book by Pamela Newkirk entitled Diversity Inc., and it is a fascinating read. So, what are some of the strategies that we can use to break down some of these barriers and advance equity and inclusion? Strategy one, invest in and be strategic about your firm-wide DE&I initiatives. This starts with a practical step number one. Acknowledge that we don't have all the answers. A key part of strategy is knowing what it is you're solving for. What's the exact nature of the goal that you're trying to accomplish? We can't even begin to target problems if we've not correctly taken this first step, defining the problem. Now, this opens the door for us to do two things. First, to seek out and evaluate your data, to analyze it, to make decisions that are informed based on the data. What does your own internal data tell you about representation throughout your ranks of people of color, of women, of LGBTQ+, of differently abled, across all aspects of difference? Are these different groups represented in your law firm at the same percentages as each group is represented in society? If not, evaluate why not and what you can do about it. Second, acknowledging that you don't have the answers actually opens up the door for you to ask, not assume what your colleagues' experiences are. Now, two ways that you might consider doing this, a practical application here is to conduct associate engagement or workplace experience or climate surveys. Then disaggregate the data across difference. How are women experiencing your law firm? How are people of color experiencing your law firm? How are different races within the category of people of color experiencing your firm? These surveys shed light on the disparities between different groups to counter the comfortable myth that everyone is doing well. Another strategy is to conduct stay interviews. Now, I know we are all familiar with the well known exit interview. Well, I'm proposing something different here. Law firms would do well to begin asking their talent about their experiences before they get ready to leave. Imagine that. You do this through relationships, right? In fostering these relationships, you can then ask questions like, what is your experience in our firm? What are we doing well? What makes you stay here? What do you enjoy about being a part of our firm? What could we be doing better? How can we better support you in your efforts to serve our clients well? Checking in, listening, and then importantly, acting on the feedback that you receive goes a long way to advancing equity and inclusion within your firm. I would caution you though, don't undertake surveys or asking these questions if you are not going to accept as truth the answers that you get back about the experiences of the people from whom you've sought this information and take action on it. I'd also say it's important to hire and designate someone in a senior role to lead your firm's DE&I efforts. Now, while the work of creating an inclusive and equitable culture belongs to everyone in a firm, it is incredibly helpful to have a senior leader tasked with driving this work forward. Now, depending on your size, you might hire a director of diversity. But even if you don't, it is a great practice to have one person whose responsibility it is to drive the work forward. Then ensure that that person is armed with the resources and support to accomplish the work in front of him or her. This includes developing a diversity strategic plan to address DE&I holistically throughout every aspect of your firm. Make advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion a competency of leaders against which they are measured and compensated. Now, I know some people cringe when they hear this, but the reality is what we know is that what gets measured gets done, what gets rewarded gets repeated. If you are serious about this work, the tone at the top of the organization has to be communicated all the way down through all of the leaders in the firm. Expect leaders to advance and deliver on specific metrics. Tie it to their compensation. Now, you can either do this as a carrot or a stick. You can sweeten the deal by adding bonuses, or you can withhold a portion of compensation. Depends on your firm culture, but the important thing is that you actually hold people accountable to achieving results in this area, just as you do for every other business objective in the firm. Strategy 2, interrupt bias whenever and wherever you find it, but do more than stumble across it. Affirmatively look for bias. How can we do that? One, commit to regular self-examination and to holding each other accountable. I would strongly commend to you, if you've never taken the Harvard Implicit Association test, if you just Google Harvard IAT, they have so many free tests that you can take. It takes 10 to 15 minutes, and you can test your own biases against that you might harbor against different groups, and maybe even your own. I would also encourage you to expand your circle, to intentionally forge relationships with people with different identities than yours. If you find yourself only calling or reaching out to or going to lunch with the same group of friends and the same homogenous group of colleagues, challenge that and expand your circle. Develop these relationships that will help you disrupt those biases in your own lives. As leaders involved in the decision making of your firms, hold each other accountable in meetings when you hear something that sounds like bias might be playing a role. Stop and question and evaluate whether bias is at play. That's the only way we're really going to make significant progress. Raise awareness about how bias impacts judgments and decision making, and equip decision makers with the strategies and tools for interrupting bias. Now, this is where regular and ongoing trainings, not one and done, that are part of your broader diversity strategic plan can come into play. But after you've raised awareness about bias, then commit to pulling back the curtain to actually evaluating your data and your policies and practices to see where the bias is seeping into the process. Commit to investing in trainings that will arm your leaders with the strategies and tools to de-bias these processes, to interrupt bias so that you are making the very best decisions possible. Evaluating your data. Again, be willing to have the courage and the discipline to confront your facts and to evaluate your data to where bias is showing up and to taking action. This includes in the recruiting process. And I'll give you one example of ways that firms are doing this. Question those box credentials, um, the check the box requirements that you have for law students to get an interview with your firm, like must have been on law review or must be in the top 2% of your class. If you evaluate the partners who are wildly successful within your firm against those same metrics, what you'll find, according to the data, is that many of the partners don't even have, don't meet the criteria that we're holding law students to. So I would strongly encourage you to question those box credentials when you are recruiting and resume screening to mitigate bias in that process. Some companies are using blind hiring software where they are using technology to remove names and any identifiers such as gender or race or sexual orientation from resumes so that you can more fairly evaluate the resume simply on the content and not based on any of these other characteristics. In interviewing, to mitigate affinity bias, ensure that you have diversity on the interviewing team. Have standardized skill or competency-based questions with numeric ratings on a scale. Stop and think about your own judgments and hold each other accountable as you're reporting back how an interview went. In terms of the plum assignments and development and evaluation and promotion, provide training for leaders with these responsibilities. And again, encourage regular self-checks, stopping him or herself in the process to double check to ensure fair treatment. And again, hold each other accountable. Strategy 3, tackle work and opportunity allocation. One way to do this is to assign a workflow coordinator to evaluate the work, the plum assignments, and key development opportunities within the firm. Now, many firms have held on to the belief that law firm partners who generate the business should get to choose who works on these matters. But the reality is this, again, this approach leads to some associates receiving better development and more sophisticated work than others. And here is what the exit interviews won't tell you. Time and time again, it's people from underrepresented groups who are often on the disadvantaged end of this, not because they don't do great work or aren't smart or capable, but simply because of our implicit biases, our natural way of going to our same go-to people. Now, law firms in the UK are actually leading the way in trying out formal work allocation processes, and hopefully the rest of us will fully catch on. But even if you don't go to a full work allocation model to assess and monitor those opportunities and workloads, something else that you might consider is assigning supervising attorneys for your associates. More than a mentor, this person would be responsible for tracking and following associates' development. at least over the course of the first several years in practice. It's a model that I've seen work well with one of my global law firm clients. Now, of course, your firm will have to develop parameters and expectations around this, but it is an approach that works well and could make a significant difference in ensuring opportunity for attorneys rising through your ranks. Review who is on the pitches and who is on the work when it comes in the door and what work they are getting. Leverage practice group leaders in this process to ensure access to opportunity for all of the firm's talent and not just some. Strategy 4, set clear objective standards and communicate them. Formalize standards and expectations for years in practice and promotion to senior associate, to partner, to equity partner. Now, this could be as simple as a document that outlines skills and competencies at every level. In this way, people of color, women, LGBTQ, differently abled, all of your attorneys then can track their own development and see where they are. Resist the urge to say things like, oh, just keep up the good work and you're on the right path without specific feedback about what people are doing well and where they have opportunities to develop so that they can progress in their careers in the ways that they would like. Communicate those standards so that there's consistency and transparency. And then hold leaders accountable to those standards. Strategy 5, prioritize and celebrate inclusive leadership and sponsorship. Provide inclusive leadership training for all people leaders across the firm. Why inclusive leadership? The leadership culture and the tone at the top of any organization matters tremendously. And anyone with responsibility for people leadership, of lawyers and staff, must value and champion diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ensure that it's woven into the very fabric of your firms. Emphasize sponsorship, how critical it is to building an inclusive and an equitable culture. To overcome our natural tendencies to invest in, spend time getting to know people who are like us and remind us of ourselves, we have to be intentional about sponsoring colleagues with different identities from ourselves. Now, many firms have formal mentoring programs, and while those are certainly necessary, where there is still a significant gap is in the area of sponsorship. Having people in positions of authority and influence who will get to know you, invest in you, and in your development and, and success, champion them, speaking up on their behalves and speaking to their capabilities in the rooms that they are in, tapping them on the shoulder for opportunities. Amplify the voices, work, contributions, and experiences of your colleagues from underrepresented groups. One easy way to do this is to ask for their perspectives in meetings. And if you agree, say so. Now, far too often, your colleagues of color will tell of their experiences in meetings, raising a great idea, the idea getting bypassed, and then usually a white male will say the exact same thing. And then all of a sudden it becomes a winning idea. Women often tell of this experience as well. When you see your colleagues doing great things, be intentional about celebrating their work and amplifying that work. And then acknowledge those who do this work well. We need to celebrate our colleagues when they model this behavior. It helps your firm live out its commitment to building inclusive and equitable cultures for all of the firm's talent. Those who are leading inclusively and leveraging all of the richness that diversity offers us should be celebrated. Essentially, what I'm asking you to do here is to leverage your position, your power, and your privilege as law firm leaders for good. Speak up on behalf of those who are different from you and marshal the firm's resources to ensure you're building a culture where you can leverage that richness throughout your entire firm and provide the very best service and client service excellence for your clients.